Egypt, officially the Arab Republic of Egypt, is a transcontinental country spanning the northeast corner of Africa and the Sinai Peninsula in the southwest corner of Asia. It is bordered by the Mediterranean Sea to the north, the Gaza Strip of Palestine and Israel to the northeast, the Red Sea to the east, Sudan to the south, and Libya to the west. The Gulf of Aqaba in the northeast separates Egypt from Jordan and Saudi Arabia. Cairo is the capital and largest city of Egypt, while Alexandria, the second largest city, is an important industrial and tourist hub at the Mediterranean coast. At approximately 100 million inhabitants, Egypt is the 14th most populated country in the world, and the third most populated in Africa. Egypt has one of the longest histories of any country, tracing its heritage along the Nile Delta back to the 6th to 4th millennia BCE. Considered a cradle of civilization, ancient Egypt saw some of the earliest developments of writing, agriculture, urbanization, organized religion, and central government. Egypt was an early and important center of Christianity, but largely adopted Islam in the 7th century. Cairo became the capital of the Fatimid Caliphate in the 10th century, and of the Mamluk Sultanate in the 13th century. Egypt then became part of the Ottoman Empire in 1517, before its local ruler Muhammad Ali established it as an autonomous Khedivate in 1867. The country was then occupied by the British Empire and gained independence in 1922 as a monarchy. Following the 1952 revolution, Egypt declared itself a republic, and in 1958 it merged with Syria to form the United Arab Republic, which was dissolved in 1961. Egypt fought several armed conflicts with Israel in 1948, 1956, 1967, and 1973, and occupied the Gaza Strip intermittently until 1967. In 1978, Egypt signed the Camp David Accords, which recognized Israel in exchange for its withdrawal from the Sinai. After the Arab Spring, which led to the 2011 Egyptian revolution and overthrow of Hosni Mubarak, the country faced a protracted period of political unrest. This included the election in 2012 of a brief, short-lived Muslim Brotherhood-aligned Islamist government spearheaded by Mohamed Morsi, and its subsequent overthrow after mass protests in 2013. Egypt's current government, a semi-presidential republic led by President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi since he was elected in 2014, has been described by a number of watchdogs as authoritarian and responsible for perpetuating the country's poor human rights record. Islam is the official religion of Egypt, and Arabic is its official language. The great majority of its people live near the banks of the Nile River, an area of about 40,000 square kilometers, where the only arable land is found. The large regions of the Sahara Desert, which constitute most of Egypt's territory, are sparsely inhabited. About 43% of Egypt's residents live across the country's urban areas, with most spread across the densely populated centers of Greater Cairo, Alexandria, and other major cities in the Nile Delta. Egypt is considered to be a regional power in North Africa, the Middle East and the Muslim world, and a middle power worldwide. It is a developing country having a diversified economy, which is the largest in Africa, the 38th largest economy by nominal GDP and 127th by nominal GDP per capita. Egypt is a founding member of the United Nations, the Non-Aligned Movement, the Arab League, the African Union, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, World Youth Forum, and a member of BRICS. History. Prehistory and Ancient Egypt. There is evidence of rock carvings along the Nile terraces and in desert oases. In the 10th millennium BCE, a culture of hunter-gatherers and fishers was replaced by a grain-grinding culture. Climate changes or overgrazing around 8000 BCE began to desiccate the pastoral lands of Egypt, forming the Sahara. Early tribal peoples migrated to the Nile River where they developed a settled agricultural economy and more centralized society. By about 6000 BCE, a Neolithic culture took root in the Nile Valley. During the Neolithic era, several pre-dynastic cultures developed independently in Upper and Lower Egypt. The Badarian culture and the successor Naqada series are generally regarded as precursors to dynastic Egypt. The earliest known Lower Egyptian site, Merim Da, predates the Badarian by about 700 years. Contemporaneous Lower Egyptian communities coexisted with their southern counterparts for more than 2,000 years, remaining culturally distinct, but maintaining frequent contact through trade. The earliest known evidence of Egyptian hieroglyphic inscriptions appeared during the pre-dynastic period on Naqada III pottery vessels, dated to about 3200 BCE. A unified kingdom was founded c. 3150 BCE by King Menes, leading to a series of dynasties that ruled Egypt for the next 3 millennia. Egyptian culture flourished during this long period and remained distinctively Egyptian in its religion, arts, language, and customs. The first 2 ruling dynasties of a unified Egypt set the stage for the Old Kingdom period, which constructed many pyramids, most notably the 3rd dynasty pyramid of Djoser and the 4th dynasty Giza pyramids. The first intermediate period ushered in a time of political upheaval for about 150 years. Stronger Nile floods and stabilization of government, however, brought back renewed prosperity for the country in the Middle Kingdom, reaching a peak during the reign of Pharaoh Amenemhat III. A second period of disunity heralded the arrival of the first foreign ruling dynasty in Egypt, that of the Semitic Hyksos. The Hyksos invaders took over much of Lower Egypt and founded a new capital at Avaris. They were driven out by an Upper Egyptian force led by Amozai, who founded the 18th dynasty and relocated the capital from Memphis to Thebes. The new kingdom began with the 18th dynasty, marking the rise of Egypt as an international power that expanded during its greatest extension to an empire as far south as Tombos in Nubia, and included parts of the Levant in the east. This period is noted for some of the most well-known pharaohs, including Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, and Ramesses II. The first historically attested expression of monotheism came during this period as Atenism. Frequent contacts with other nations brought new ideas to the new kingdom. The country was later invaded and conquered by Libyans, Nubians and Assyrians, but native Egyptians eventually drove them out and regained control of their country. In 525 BCE, the Achaemenid Empire, led by Cambyses II, began their conquest of Egypt, eventually capturing the pharaoh Psamtik III at the Battle of Pelusium. Cambyses II then assumed the formal title of pharaoh, but ruled Egypt from his home of Susa in Persia, leaving Egypt under the control of a satrapy. The entire 27th dynasty of Egypt, from 525 to 402 BCE, save for Puttabastus III, was an entirely Achaemenid-ruled period, with the Achaemenid emperors all being granted the title of pharaoh. A few temporarily successful revolts against the Achaemenids marked the 5th century BCE, but Egypt was never able to permanently overthrow the Achaemenids. The 30th dynasty was the last native ruling dynasty during the Pharaonic epoch. It fell to the Achaemenids again in 343 BCE after the last native pharaoh, King Nectanebo II, was defeated in battle. This 31st dynasty of Egypt, however, did not last long, as the Achaemenids were toppled several decades later by Alexander the Great. The Macedonian Greek general of Alexander, Ptolemy Isoter, founded the Ptolemaic dynasty. Middle Ages, 7th century. The Byzantines were able to regain control of the country after a brief Sassanid Persian invasion early in the 7th century amidst the Byzantine, Sasanian War, during which they established a new short-lived province for 10 years known as Sasanian Egypt, until 639, when Egypt was invaded and conquered by the Islamic Caliphate by the Muslim Arabs. When they defeated the Byzantine armies in Egypt, the Arabs brought Islam to the country. Sometime during this period, Egyptians began to blend in their new faith with indigenous beliefs and practices, leading to various Sufi orders that have flourished to this day. These earlier rites had survived the period of Coptic Christianity. In 639 an army were sent in Egypt by the second caliph, Umar, under the command of Amr ibn al-Az. They defeated a Roman army at the Battle of Heliopolis. Amr next proceeded in the direction of Alexandria, which surrendered to him by a treaty signed on November 8, 641. Alexandria was regained for the Byzantine Empire in 645 but was retaken by Amr in 646. In 654 an invasion fleet sent by Constans II was repulsed. The Arabs founded the capital of Egypt called Fustad, which was later burned down during the Crusades. Cairo was later built in the year 986 to grow to become the largest and richest city in the Arab Caliphate, second only to Baghdad. Early modern period, Ottoman Egypt. Egypt was conquered by the Ottoman Turks in 1517, after which it became a province of the Ottoman Empire. The defensive militarization damaged its civil society and economic institutions. The weakening of the economic system combined with the effects of plague left Egypt vulnerable to foreign invasion. Portuguese traders took over their trade. Between 1687 and 1731, Egypt experienced 6 famines. The 1784 famine cost it roughly 1/6 of its population. Egypt was always a difficult province for the Ottoman sultans to control, due in part to the continuing power and influence of the Mamluks, the Egyptian military caste who had ruled the country for centuries. Egypt remained semi-autonomous under the Mamluks until it was invaded by the French forces of Napoleon Bonaparte in 1798. After the French were defeated by the British, a three-way power struggle ensued between the Ottoman Turks, Egyptian Mamluks who had ruled Egypt for centuries, and Albanian mercenaries in the service of the Ottomans. Muhammad Ali dynasty. After the French were expelled, power was seized in 1805 by Muhammad Ali Pasha, an Albanian military commander of the Ottoman army in Egypt. Muhammad Ali massacred the Mamluks and established a dynasty that was to rule Egypt until the revolution of 1952. The introduction in 1820 of long staple cotton transformed its agriculture into a cash crop monoculture before the end of the century, concentrating land ownership and shifting production towards international markets. Muhammad Ali annexed northern Sudan, Syria, and parts of Arabia and Anatolia, but in 1841 the European powers, fearful lest he topple the Ottoman Empire itself, forced him to return most of his conquests to the Ottomans. His military ambition required him to modernize the country. He built industries, a system of canals for irrigation and transport, and reformed the civil service. He constructed a military state with around 4% of the populace serving the army to raise Egypt to a powerful positioning in the Ottoman Empire in a way showing various similarities to the Soviet strategies conducted in the 20th century. Muhammad Ali Pasha evolved the military from one that convened under the tradition of the corvée to a great modernized army. He introduced conscription of the male peasantry in 19th century Egypt, and took a novel approach to create his great army, strengthening it with numbers and in skill. Education and training of the new soldiers became mandatory. The new concepts were furthermore enforced by isolation. The men were held in barracks to avoid distraction of their growth as a military unit to be reckoned with. The resentment for the military way of life eventually faded from the men and a new ideology took hold, one of nationalism and pride. It was with the help of this newly reborn martial unit that Muhammad Ali imposed his rule over Egypt. The policy that Muhammad Ali Pasha followed during his reign explains partly why the numeracy in Egypt compared to other North African and Middle Eastern countries increased only at a remarkably small rate, as investment in further education only took place in the military and industrial sector. Muhammad Ali was succeeded briefly by his son Ibrahim in September 1848, then by a grandson Abbas I, then by Said, and Ismail, who encouraged science and agriculture and banned slavery in Egypt. Khedivate of Egypt. The Suez Canal, built in partnership with the French, was completed in 1869. Its construction was financed by European banks. Large sums also went to patronage and corruption. New taxes caused popular discontent. In 1875 Ismail avoided bankruptcy by selling all Egypt's shares in the canal to the British government. Within 3 years this led to the imposition of British and French controllers who sat in the Egyptian cabinet, and, with the financial power of the bondholders behind them, were the real power in the government. Other circumstances like epidemic diseases, floods and wars drove the economic downturn and increased Egypt's dependency on foreign debt even further. Local dissatisfaction with the Khedive and with European intrusion led to the formation of the first nationalist groupings in 1879, with Ahmed Urabi a prominent figure. After increasing tensions and nationalist revolts, the United Kingdom invaded Egypt in 1882, crushing the Egyptian army at the Battle of Tel el-Kabir and militarily occupying the country. Following this, the Khedivate became a de facto British protectorate under nominal Ottoman sovereignty. In 1899 the Anglo-Egyptian Condominium Agreement was signed. The agreement stated that Sudan would be jointly governed by the Khedivate of Egypt and the United Kingdom. However, actual control of Sudan was in British hands only. In 1906, the Denchawai incident prompted many neutral Egyptians to join the nationalist movement. Sultanate of Egypt. In 1914 the Ottoman Empire entered World War I in alliance with the Central Empires. Khedive Abbas II, who had grown increasingly hostile to the British in preceding years, decided to support the motherland in war. Following such decision, the British forcibly removed him from power and replaced him with his brother Hussein Kamel. Hussein Kamel declared Egypt's independence from the Ottoman Empire, assuming the title of Sultan of Egypt. Shortly following independence, Egypt was declared a protectorate of the United Kingdom. After World War I, Saad Zaghloul and the Wafd Party led the Egyptian nationalist movement to a majority at the local legislative assembly. When the British exiled Zaghloul and his associates to Malta on March 8, 1919, the country arose in its first modern revolution. The revolt led the UK government to issue a unilateral declaration of Egypt's independence on February 22, 1922. Kingdom of Egypt. Following independence from the United Kingdom, Sultan Fuad I assumed the title of King of Egypt. Despite being nominally independent, the kingdom was still under British military occupation and the UK still had great influence over the state. The new government drafted and implemented a constitution in 1923 based on a parliamentary system. The Nationalist Wafd Party won a landslide victory in the 1923-1924 election and Saad Zaghloul was appointed as the new prime minister. In 1936, the Anglo-Egyptian Treaty was concluded and British troops withdrew from Egypt, except for the Suez Canal. The treaty did not resolve the question of Sudan, which, under the terms of the existing Anglo-Egyptian Condominium Agreement of 1899, stated that Sudan should be jointly governed by Egypt and Britain, but with real power remaining in British hands. Britain used Egypt as a base for Allied operations throughout the region, especially the battles in North Africa against Italy and Germany. Its highest priorities were control of the eastern Mediterranean, and especially keeping the Suez Canal open for merchant ships and for military connections with India and Australia. When the war began in September 1939, Egypt declared martial law and broke off diplomatic relations with Germany. It broke diplomatic relations with Italy in 1940, but never declared war, even when the Italian army invaded Egypt. The Egyptian army did no fighting. In June 1940 the king dismissed Prime Minister Ali Mar, who got on poorly with the British. A new coalition government was formed with the independent Hassan Pasha Sabri as Prime Minister. Following a ministerial crisis in February 1942, the ambassador Sir Miles Lampson pressed Farouk to have a WAFT or WAFT coalition government replace Hussein Sinai Pasha's government. On the night of February 4, 1942, British troops and tanks surrounded Abdeen Palace in Cairo and Lampson presented Farouk with an ultimatum. Farouk capitulated, and Nahas formed a government shortly thereafter. Most British troops were withdrawn to the Suez Canal area in 1947, but nationalist, anti-British feelings continued to grow after the war. Anti-monarchy sentiments further increased following the disastrous performance of the kingdom in the First Arab-Israeli War. The 1950 election saw a landslide victory of the nationalist WAFT party, and the king was forced to appoint Mustafa el-Nahas as new prime minister. In 1951 Egypt unilaterally withdrew from the Anglo-Egyptian Treaty of 1936 and ordered all remaining British troops to leave the Suez Canal. As the British refused to leave their base around the Suez Canal, the Egyptian government cut off the water and refused to allow food into the Suez Canal base, announced a boycott of British goods, forbade Egyptian workers from entering the base, and sponsored guerrilla attacks. On January 24, 1952, Egyptian guerrillas staged a fierce attack on the British forces around the Suez Canal, during which the Egyptian auxiliary police were observed helping the guerrillas. In response, on January 25, General George Erskine sent out British tanks and infantry to surround the auxiliary police station in Ismailia. The police commander called the Interior Minister, Fuad Sirajdin, Nahas's right-hand man, to ask if he should surrender or fight. Sirajdin ordered the police to fight to the last man and the last bullet. The resulting battle saw the police station leveled and 43 Egyptian policemen killed together with 3 British soldiers. The Ismailia incident outraged Egypt. The next day, January 26, 1952 was Black Saturday, as the anti-British riot was known, that saw much of downtown Cairo, which the Khedive Ismail the Magnificent had rebuilt in the style of Paris, burned down. Farouk blamed the WAFT for the Black Saturday riot, and dismissed Nahas as prime minister the next day. He was replaced by Ali Mar Pasha. On 22 to 23 July 1952, the Free Officers Movement, led by Muhammad Nahib and Gamal Abdel Nasser, launched a coup d'état against the king. Farouk I abdicated the throne to his son Fuad II, who was, at the time, a 7-month-old baby. The royal family left Egypt some days later, and the Council of Regency, led by Prince Muhammad Abdel Munaim, was formed. The council, however, held only nominal authority, and the real power was actually in the hands of the Revolutionary Command Council, led by Nahib and Nasser. Popular expectations for immediate reforms led to the workers' riots in Kafr d'Awar on August 12, 1952. Following a brief experiment with civilian rule, the Free Officers abrogated the monarchy and the 1923 constitution and declared Egypt a republic on June 18, 1953. Nahib was proclaimed as president, while Nasser was appointed as the new prime minister. Republic of Egypt. Following the 1952 revolution by the Free Officers Movement, the rule of Egypt passed to military hands and all political parties were banned. On June 18, 1953, the Egyptian Republic was declared, with General Muhammad Nahib as the first president of the Republic, serving in that capacity for a little under 1.5 years. President Nasser. Nahib was forced to resign in 1954 by Gamal Abdel Nasser, a Pan-Arabist and the real architect of the 1952 movement, and was later put under house arrest. After Nahib's resignation, the position of president was vacant until the election of Nasser in 1956. In October 1954, Egypt and the United Kingdom agreed to abolish the Anglo-Egyptian Condominium Agreement of 1899 and grant Sudan independence. The agreement came into force on January 1, 1956. Nasser assumed power as president in June 1956. British forces completed their withdrawal from the occupied Suez Canal zone on June 13, 1956. He nationalized the Suez Canal on July 26, 1956. His hostile approach towards Israel and economic nationalism prompted the beginning of the Second Arab-Israeli War, in which Israel with support from France and the United Kingdom occupied the Sinai Peninsula and the Canal. The war came to an end because of US and USSR diplomatic intervention and the status quo was restored. United Arab Republic. In 1958, Egypt and Syria formed a sovereign union known as the United Arab Republic. The union was short-lived, ending in 1961 when Syria seceded, thus ending the union. During most of its existence, the United Arab Republic was also in a loose confederation with North Yemen, known as the United Arab States. In the early 1960s, Egypt became fully involved in the North Yemen civil war. Despite several military moves and peace conferences, the war sank into a stalemate. In mid-May 1967, the Soviet Union issued warnings to Nasser of an impending Israeli attack on Syria. Although the Chief of Staff Mohammad Fawza verified them as baseless, Nasser took 3 successive steps that made the war virtually inevitable. On May 14 he deployed his troops in Sinai near the border with Israel. On May 19 he expelled the UN peacekeepers stationed in the Sinai Peninsula border with Israel, and on May 23 he closed the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping. On May 26 Nasser declared, "The battle will be a general one and our basic objective will be to destroy Israel." This prompted the beginning of the Third Arab-Israeli War in which Israel attacked Egypt, and occupied Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip, which Egypt had occupied since the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. During the 1967 war, an emergency law was enacted, and remained in effect until 2012, with the exception of an 18-month break in 1980-81. Under this law, police powers were extended, constitutional rights suspended and censorship legalized. At the time of the fall of the Egyptian monarchy in the early 1950s, less than 500,000 Egyptians were considered upper class and rich, 4 million middle class and 17 million lower class and poor. Fewer than half of all primary school-age children attended school, most of them being boys. Nasser's policies changed this. Land reform and distribution, the dramatic growth in university education, and government support to national industries greatly improved social mobility and flattened the social curve. From academic year 1953 to 54 through 1965 to 66, overall public school enrollments more than doubled. Millions of previously poor Egyptians, through education and jobs in the public sector, joined the middle class. Doctors, engineers, teachers, lawyers, journalists, constituted the bulk of the swelling middle class in Egypt under Nasser. During the 1960s, the Egyptian economy went from sluggish to the verge of collapse, the society became less free, and Nasser's appeal waned considerably. Arab Republic of Egypt. President Sadat. In 1970, President Nasser died and was succeeded by Anwar Sadat. Sadat switched Egypt's Cold War allegiance from the Soviet Union to the United States, expelling Soviet advisors in 1972. He launched the Infida economic reform policy, while clamping down on religious and secular opposition. In 1973, Egypt, along with Syria, launched the Fourth Arab-Israeli War, a surprise attack to regain part of the Sinai territory Israel had captured 6 years earlier. In 1975, Sadat shifted Nasser's economic policies and sought to use his popularity to reduce government regulations and encourage foreign investment through his program of Infida. Through this policy, incentives such as reduced taxes and import tariffs attracted some investors, but investments were mainly directed at low-risk and profitable ventures like tourism and construction, abandoning Egypt's infant industries. Because of the elimination of subsidies on basic foodstuffs, it led to the 1977 Egyptian bread riots. Sadat made a historic visit to Israel in 1977, which led to the 1979 Egypt-Israel peace treaty in exchange for Israeli withdrawal from Sinai. In return, Egypt recognized Israel as a legitimate sovereign state. Sadat's initiative sparked enormous controversy in the Arab world and led to Egypt's expulsion from the Arab League, but it was supported by most Egyptians. Sadat was assassinated by an Islamic extremist in October 1981. President Mubarak. Hosni Mubarak came to power after the assassination of Sadat in a referendum in which he was the only candidate. Hosni Mubarak reaffirmed Egypt's relationship with Israel yet eased the tensions with Egypt's Arab neighbors. Domestically, Mubarak faced serious problems. Mass poverty and unemployment led rural families to stream into cities like Cairo, where they ended up in crowded slums, barely managing to survive. On February 25, 1986, the security police started rioting, protesting against reports that their term of duty was to be extended from 3 to 4 years. Hotels, nightclubs, restaurants, and casinos were attacked in Cairo, and there were riots in other cities. A daytime curfew was imposed. It took the army 3 days to restore order. 107 people were killed. In the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s, terrorist attacks in Egypt became numerous and severe, and began to target Christian Copts, foreign tourists, and government officials. In the 1990s, an Islamist group, Al-Ghama'ah al-Islamiyah, engaged in an extended campaign of violence, from the murders and attempted murders of prominent writers and intellectuals, to the repeated targeting of tourists and foreigners. Serious damage was done to the largest sector of Egypt's economy, tourism, and in turn to the government, but it also devastated the livelihoods of many of the people on whom the group depended for support. During Mubarak's reign, the political scene was dominated by the National Democratic Party, which was created by Sadat in 1978. It passed the 1993 Syndicates Law, 1995 Press Law, and 1999 Non-Governmental Associations Law, which hampered freedoms of association and expression by imposing new regulations and draconian penalties on violations. As a result, by the late 1990s, parliamentary politics had become virtually irrelevant, and alternative avenues for political expression were curtailed as well. On November 17, 1997, 62 people, mostly tourists, were massacred near Luxor. In late February 2005, Mubarak announced a reform of the presidential election law, paving the way for multi-candidate polls for the first time since the 1952 movement. However, the new law placed restrictions on the candidates, and led to Mubarak's easy re-election victory. voter turnout was less than 25%. Election observers also alleged government interference in the election process. After the election, Mubarak imprisoned Ayman Nawr, the runner-up. Human Rights Watch's 2006 report on Egypt detailed serious human rights violations, including routine torture, arbitrary detentions, and trials before military and state security courts. In 2007, Amnesty International released a report alleging that Egypt had become an international center for torture, where other nations send suspects for interrogation, often as part of the war on terror. Egypt's foreign ministry quickly issued a rebuttal to this report. Constitutional changes voted on March 19, 2007 prohibited parties from using religion as a basis for political activity, allowed the drafting of a new anti-terrorism law, authorized broad police powers of arrest and surveillance, and gave the president power to dissolve parliament and end judicial election monitoring. In 2009, Dr. Ali Eldin Hilal Dessouky, media secretary of the National Democratic Party, described Egypt as a pharaonic political system, and democracy as a long-term goal. Dessouky also stated that the real center of power in Egypt is the military. Revolution. On January 25, 2011, widespread protests began against Mubarak's government. On February 11, 2011, Mubarak resigned and fled Cairo. Jubilant celebrations broke out in Cairo's Tahrir Square at the news. The Egyptian military then assumed the power to govern. Mohammed Hussein Tantawi, chairman of the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, became the de facto interim head of state. On February 13, 2011, the military dissolved the parliament and suspended the constitution. A constitutional referendum was held on March 19, 2011. On November 28, 2011, Egypt held its first parliamentary election since the previous regime had been in power. Turnout was high and there were no reports of major irregularities or violence. President Morsi. Mohamed Morsi was elected president on June 24, 2012. On June 30, 2012, Mohamed Morsi was sworn in as Egypt's president. On August 2, 2012, Egypt's Prime Minister Hisham Kandil announced his 35-member cabinet comprising 28 newcomers, including 4 from the Muslim Brotherhood. Liberal and secular groups walked out of the Constituent Assembly because they believed that it would impose strict Islamic practices, while Muslim Brotherhood backers threw their support behind Morsi. On November 22, 2012, President Morsi issued a temporary declaration immunizing his decrees from challenge and seeking to protect the work of the Constituent Assembly. The move led to massive protests and violent action throughout Egypt. On December 5, 2012, tens of thousands of supporters and opponents of President Morsi clashed, in what was described as the largest violent battle between Islamists and their foes since the country's revolution. Mohamed Morsi offered a national dialogue with opposition leaders but refused to cancel the December 2012 constitutional referendum. Political crisis. On July 3, 2013, after a wave of public discontent with autocratic excesses of Morsi's Muslim Brotherhood government, the military removed Morsi from office, dissolved the Shura Council and installed a temporary interim government. On July 4, 2013, 68-year-old Chief Justice of the Supreme Constitutional Court of Egypt Adli Mansour was sworn in as acting president over the new government following the removal of Morsi. The new Egyptian authorities cracked down on the Muslim Brotherhood and its supporters, jailing thousands, and forcefully dispersing pro-Morsi and pro-Brotherhood protests. Many of the Muslim Brotherhood leaders and activists have either been sentenced to death or life imprisonment in a series of mass trials. On January 18, 2014, the interim government instituted a new constitution following a referendum approved by an overwhelming majority of voters. 38.6% of registered voters participated in the referendum, a higher number than the 33% who voted in a referendum during Morsi's tenure. President El-Sisi. On March 26, 2014, Field Marshal Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, Egyptian Defense Minister and Commander-in-Chief Egyptian Armed Forces, retired from the military, announcing he would stand as a candidate in the 2014 presidential election. The poll, held between 26 and May 28, 2014, resulted in a landslide victory for el-Sisi. Sisi was sworn into office as President of Egypt on June 8, 2014. The Muslim Brotherhood and some liberal and secular activist groups boycotted the vote. Even though the interim authorities extended voting to a third day, the 46% turnout was lower than the 52% turnout in the 2012 election. A new parliamentary election was held in December 2015, resulting in a landslide victory for pro-Sisi parties, which secured a strong majority in the newly formed House of Representatives. In 2016, Egypt entered in a diplomatic crisis with Italy following the murder of researcher Giulio Regeni. In April 2016, Prime Minister Matteo Renzi recalled the Italian ambassador from Cairo because of lack of cooperation from the Egyptian government in the investigation. The ambassador was sent back to Egypt in 2017 by the new Prime Minister Paolo Gentiloni. El-Sisi was re-elected in 2018, facing no serious opposition. In 2019, a series of constitutional amendments were approved by the parliament, further increasing the president's and the military's power, increasing presidential terms from 4 years to 6 years, and allowing incumbent President El-Sisi to run for an additional third term. The proposals were approved in a referendum. The dispute between Egypt and Ethiopia over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam escalated in 2020. Egypt sees the dam as an existential threat, fearing that the dam will reduce the amount of water it receives from the Nile. In December 2020, final results of the parliamentary election confirmed a clear majority of the seats for Egypt's Mustaqbal Watan party, which strongly supports President El-Sisi. The party even increased its majority, partly because of new electoral rules. In December 2023, El-Sisi won the 2023 presidential election with 90% of the vote, and was re-elected to an additional third term that lasts until 2030. The official turnout was 67%, the highest of any Egyptian presidential election since 2012. Government. The House of Representatives, whose members are elected to serve 5-year terms, specializes in legislation. Elections were held between November 2011 and January 2012, which were later dissolved. The next parliamentary election was announced to be held within 6 months of the Constitution's ratification on January 18, 2014, and were held in 2 phases, from October 17 to December 2, 2015. Originally, the parliament was to be formed before the president was elected, but interim President Adli Mansour pushed the date. The 2014 Egyptian presidential election took place on 26 to 28 May. Official figures showed a turnout of 25,578,233, with Abdel Fattah el-Sisi winning with 23.78 million votes, compared to 757,511 for Hamdeen Sabahi. After a wave of public discontent with the autocratic excesses of the Muslim Brotherhood government of President Mohamed Morsi, on July 3, 2013 then-General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi announced the removal of Morsi from office and the suspension of the constitution. A 50-member Constitution Committee was formed for modifying the Constitution, which was later published for public voting and was adopted on January 18, 2014. In 2024, as part of its Freedom in the World report, Freedom House rated political rights in Egypt at 6, and civil liberties at 12. According to the 2023 VDEM Democracy Indices, Egypt is the 8th least democratic country in Africa. The 2023 edition of The Economist Democracy Index categorizes Egypt as an authoritarian regime, with a score of 2.93. Egyptian nationalism predates its Arab counterpart by many decades, having roots in the 19th century and becoming the dominant mode of expression of Egyptian anti-colonial activists and intellectuals until the early 20th century. The ideology espoused by Islamists such as the Muslim Brotherhood is mostly supported by the lower middle strata of Egyptian society. Egypt has the oldest continuous parliamentary tradition in the Arab world. The first popular assembly was established in 1866. It was disbanded as a result of the British occupation of 1882, and the British allowed only a consultative body to sit. In 1923, however, after the country's independence was declared, a new constitution provided for a parliamentary monarchy. Military and foreign relations. The military is influential in the political and economic life of Egypt and exempts itself from laws that apply to other sectors. It enjoys considerable power, prestige, and independence within the state and has been widely considered part of the Egyptian deep state. Egypt is speculated by Israel to be the second country in the region with a spy satellite, EgyptSat-1, in addition to EgyptSat-2 launched on April 16, 2014. The United States provides Egypt with annual military assistance, which in 2015 amounted to US $1.3 billion. In 1989, Egypt was designated as a major non-NATO ally of the United States. Nevertheless, ties between the two countries have partially soured since the July 2013 overthrow of Islamist President Mohamed Morsi, with the Obama administration denouncing Egypt over its crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood, and canceling future military exercises involving the two countries. There have been recent attempts, however, to normalize relations between the two, with both governments frequently calling for mutual support in the fight against regional and international terrorism. However, following the election of Republican Donald Trump as the President of the United States, the two countries were looking to improve the Egyptian-American relations. On April 3, 2017, al-Sisi met with Trump at the White House, marking the first visit of an Egyptian president to Washington in 8 years. Trump praised al-Sisi in what was reported as a public relations victory for the Egyptian president, and signaled it was time for a normalization of the relations between Egypt and the U.S. Relations with Russia have improved significantly following Mohamed Morsi's removal, and both countries have worked since then to strengthen military and trade ties among other aspects of bilateral cooperation. Relations with China have also improved considerably. In 2014, Egypt and China established a bilateral comprehensive strategic partnership. The permanent headquarters of the Arab League are located in Cairo, and the body's Secretary General has traditionally been Egyptian. This position is currently held by former Foreign Minister Ahmed Aboulgaid. The Arab League briefly moved from Egypt to Tunis in 1978 to protest the Egypt-Israel peace treaty, but it later returned to Cairo in 1989. Gulf monarchies, including the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, have pledged billions of dollars to help Egypt overcome its economic difficulties since the overthrow of Morsi. Following the 1973 war and the subsequent peace treaty, Egypt became the first Arab nation to establish diplomatic relations with Israel. Despite that, Israel is still widely considered as a hostile state by the majority of Egyptians. Egypt has played a historical role as a mediator in resolving various disputes in the Middle East, most notably its handling of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the peace process. Egypt's ceasefire and truce brokering efforts in Gaza have hardly been challenged following Israel's evacuation of its settlements from the Strip in 2005, despite increasing animosity towards the Hamas government in Gaza following the ouster of Mohamed Morsi, and despite recent attempts by countries like Turkey and Qatar to take over this role. Ties between Egypt and other non-Arab Middle Eastern nations, including Iran and Turkey, have often been strained. Tensions with Iran are mostly due to Egypt's peace treaty with Israel and Iran's rivalry with traditional Egyptian allies in the Gulf. Turkey's recent support for the now-banned Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and its alleged involvement in Libya also made both countries bitter regional rivals. Egypt is a founding member of the Non-Aligned Movement and the United Nations. It is also a member of the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie, since 1983. Former Egyptian Deputy Prime Minister Boutros Boutros-Ghali served as Secretary General of the United Nations from 1991 to 1996. In 2008, Egypt was estimated to have 2 million African refugees, including over 20,000 Sudanese nationals registered with UNRWA as refugees fleeing armed conflict or asylum seekers. Egypt adopted harsh, sometimes lethal methods of border control. Languages. The official language of the Republic is Literary Arabic. The spoken languages are Egyptian Arabic, Saudi Arabic, Eastern Egyptian Badawi Arabic, Sudanese Arabic, Damari, Nubian, Beja, Siwi, and others. Additionally, Greek, Armenian and Italian, and more recently, African languages like Amharic and Tigrinya are the main languages of immigrants. The main foreign languages taught in schools, by order of popularity, are English, French, German and Italian. Historically Egyptian was spoken, the latest stage of which is Coptic Egyptian. Spoken Coptic was mostly extinct by the 17th century but may have survived in isolated pockets in Upper Egypt as late as the 19th century. It remains in use as the liturgical language of the Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria. It forms a separate branch among the family of Afro-Asiatic languages. Religion. Egypt has the largest Muslim population in the Arab world, and the sixth world's largest Muslim population, and home for 5% of the world's Muslim population. Egypt also has the largest Christian population in the Middle East and North Africa. Egypt is a predominantly Sunni Muslim country with Islam as its state religion. The percentage of adherents of various religions is a controversial topic in Egypt. An estimated 85 to 90% are identified as Muslim, 10 to 15% as Coptic Christians, and 1% as other Christian denominations, although without a census the numbers cannot be known. Other estimates put the Christian population as high as 15 to 20%. Non-denominational Muslims form roughly 12% of the population. Egypt was a Christian country before the 7th century, and after Islam arrived, the country was gradually Islamized into a majority Muslim country. It is not known when Muslims reached a majority, variously estimated from c. 1000 CE to as late as the 14th century. Egypt emerged as a center of politics and culture in the Muslim world. Under Anwar Sadat, Islam became the official state religion and Sharia the main source of law. It is estimated that 15 million Egyptians follow native Sufi orders, with the Sufi leadership asserting that the numbers are much greater as many Egyptian Sufis are not officially registered with a Sufi order. At least 305 people were killed during a November 2017 attack on a Sufi mosque in Sinai. There is also a Shia minority. The Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs estimates the Shia population at 1 to 2.2 million and could measure as much as 3 million. The Ahmadiyya population is estimated at less than 50,000, whereas the Salaf population is estimated at 5 to 6 million. Cairo is famous for its numerous mosque minarets and has been dubbed the city of 1,000 minarets. Of the Christian population in Egypt, over 90% belong to the native Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria, an Oriental Orthodox Christian church. Other native Egyptian Christians are adherents of the Coptic Catholic Church, the Evangelical Church of Egypt, and various other Protestant denominations. Non-native Christian communities are largely found in the urban regions of Cairo and Alexandria, such as the Syro-Lebanese, who belong to Greek Catholic, Greek Orthodox, and Maronite Catholic denominations. Egypt hosts the Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria. It was founded back in the 1st century, considered to be the largest church in the country. Egypt is also the home of Al-Azhar University, which is today the world's most influential voice of establishment Sunni Islam and is, by some measures, the second oldest continuously operating university in the world. Egypt recognizes only 3 religions: Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. Other faiths and minority Muslim sects practiced by Egyptians, such as the small Baha'i faith and Ahmadiyya communities, are not recognized by the state and face persecution by the government, which labels these groups a threat to Egypt's national security. Individuals, particularly atheists, wishing to include their religion on their mandatory state-issued identification cards are denied this ability, and are put in the position of either not obtaining required identification or lying about their faith. A 2008 court ruling allowed members of unrecognized faiths to obtain identification and leave the religion field blank. Culture. Egypt is a recognized cultural trendsetter of the Arabic-speaking world. Contemporary Arabic and Middle Eastern culture is heavily influenced by Egyptian literature, music, film, and television. Egypt gained a regional leadership role during the 1950s and 1960s, giving a further enduring boost to the standing of Egyptian culture in the Arabic-speaking world. Egyptian identity evolved in the span of a long period of occupation to accommodate Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, and a new language, Arabic, and its spoken descendant, Egyptian Arabic, which is also based on many ancient Egyptian words. The work of early 19th century scholar Rafai al-Tahta'i renewed interest in Egyptian antiquity and exposed Egyptian society to Enlightenment principles. Tahta'i co-founded with education reformer Ali Mubarak a native Egyptology school that looked for inspiration to medieval Egyptian scholars, such as Suyuti and Makrizi, who themselves studied the history, language, and antiquities of Egypt. Egypt's Renaissance peaked in the late 19th and early 20th centuries through the work of people like Muhammad Abduh, Ahmed Lutfi el-Said, Muhammad Lutfi Guma, Tawfiq el-Hakim, Louis Awad, Qasim Amin, Salama Mousa, Taha Hussein and Mahmoud Mokhtar. They forged a liberal path for Egypt expressed as a commitment to personal freedom, secularism, and faith in science to bring progress.